Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, California English Language Development Standards, Part 2, Learning about how English works. This is the fifth of 5 webinars regarding the California English Language Development Standards. This webinar will highlight Chapter 3, the Standards, Kindergarten through Grade 12, Part 2 of the ELD Standards, Learning about how English works. We welcome teachers, administrators, instructional coaches, professional learning providers, and anyone new to the California English Language Development Standards or who would like to refresh their familiarity with the English Language Development Standards. My name is Gustavo Gonzalez. I'm an education programs consultant in the Language Policy and Leadership Office, or LPLO, in the Multilingual Support Division at the California Department of Education, or the CDE. I will be presenting today's webinar along with my co-presenter, Christine Snyder.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Gustavo mentioned, my name is Christine Snyder, and I am with the Region 15 Comprehensive Center at WestEd. The Region 15 Comprehensive Center is one of 19 federally funded regional comprehensive centers. The leadership and staff at the Comprehensive Center provide capacity-building technical assistance to state educational agencies. The Comprehensive Center collaborated with the CDE as thought partners on this project. It is a pleasure to be here today. There will be opportunities to ask questions during today's session. We will answer as many questions as we can toward the end of today's webinar. Submit your questions using the question and answer or Q&A feature. We will also post frequently asked questions or FAQs on the CDE English Language Development or ELD Standards webpage at a later date following today's webinar. And in the chat, we will post the link to the ELD Standards webpage. Another way is to email your questions to the Language Policy and Leadership Office email address at lplo@cde.ca.gov. We will post the LPLO email address in the chat. In addition, we programmed opportunities to reflect on today's content and post a response to the reflection prompts in Padlet. And we'll post the link to Padlet in the chat. So, we'll now take a few moments to see who is in attendance for today's webinar. A poll will appear on your screen. Please complete the poll by identifying what your role or position is at your local level. If the poll does not feature your role or position, please select Other. The poll will show the following options. Are you a teacher, paraeducator, site administrator, or instructional coach? Professional learning provider, district administrator, or school board member, County Office of Education Administrator, teacher education faculty, community organization member, or other. Okay, so we'll give you a few minutes to enter in the poll. And we'll go ahead and close that poll, let's say in 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2.
I think we need to relaunch it.
Oh, okay.
I'll relaunch it.
Okay. Let's go ahead and let's see. Oh, there it is. All right. Please go ahead and enter your role. And I can see it coming up. Oh, thank you. 70% of us, oh, there it goes, 72%. Here we go. Let's see if we can get to 100. Getting there, getting there. Okay, I'll give it about 10 more seconds. 10, 9, 8, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Last chance. All right. So let's go ahead and share those results. So joining us today, we have vast majority, 61%, teacher, paraeducator, site administrator, or instructional coach. Fantastic, welcome. Then 17% are professional learning providers or district administrators or school board members. 15% County Office of Education Administrator, Teacher Education Faculty, Community Organization Member, and 7% Other. Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's great to know who we have in the call. So before we jump into the content, we would just like to find out more about your knowledge of Part 2, learning about how English works, of the California English Language Development Standards, or CA California ELD Standards. A second poll will appear on your screen. Please complete the poll by identifying what knowledge you have around Part 2 of the ELD Standards. Please select the best answer that most reflects your level of knowledge, and the poll will show the following options. I have extensive knowledge of Part 2 of the ELD Standards. I have some knowledge of Part 2 of the ELD Standards. I have little or no knowledge of Part 2 of the ELD Standards. Okay, great. We're at 75% participation. Let's give it a few more seconds, see if we can get everybody. Let's give it another 10 seconds, let's say. 9, 8, 7, 5, 4, 2, 1. All right, let's close that poll. This is so great. 78% of us have some knowledge of Part 2 of the ELD Standards. You are in the right place, especially our 11%. I have little or no knowledge of Part 2 of the ELD Standards. Fantastic. And for our 11%, I have extensive knowledge of Part 2 of the ELD Standards. We will really invite you to share your expertise and help build the capacity of everyone on the call. And so thank you for completing the poll. We hope today's webinar will be extremely helpful to all in becoming an expert on the California ELD Standards. We'll be using a Padlet today. It houses resources for today's webinar, questions for engagement opportunities later in the presentation, and we'll post the link to the Padlet in the chat, or you can navigate to it using the QR code on the screen. And now we'll, on the agenda for today's webinar, we will present the Part 2 of ELD Standards, look at the corresponding English Language Arts Standards, or ELA standards, of each Part 2 ELD standard. We'll analyze the Part 2 ELD standards across the proficiency levels, and we'll discuss the opportunities for ELD instruction and supports for English learner, or EL, students. The goals for today's webinar are for our participants to become more familiarized with the Part 2 ELD standards and to analyze the Part 2 ELD standards to support EL students' development and use of academic language, English. In the chat, we posted a link to the CDE webpage where you can access the PDF version of the California ELD standards. Click on the ELD Standards tab and you will see the link there. And now let's take a deep dive into Part 2 of the ELD standards, and I'll pass it on over to Gustavo.
Thank you, Christine. We put in the chat the links to the California ELD standards, the English Language Arts standards, Next Generation Science standards, and Mathematics standards. We invite everyone to download or get a copy of the California ELD standards. We invite English teachers, English language arts teachers, and literacy teachers to download or get your copy of the English language arts standards. Also, we invite grades 6 through 12 English language arts, history, social studies, science, and teachers of other technical subjects to access the standards for literacy and history, social studies, science, and technical subjects, beginning on page 79 of the English Language Arts Standards publication. These standards involve the reading standards for literacy and history, social studies, the reading standards for literacy and science and technical subjects, and writing standards for literacy in history, social studies, science, and technical subjects for grades 6 through 12. We invite science teachers to access the next generation science standards and science and engineering practices. And we invite math teachers to access the mathematics standards along with the standards for mathematical practices. We will present part 2 of the ELD standards during today's webinar. With the amount of time we have during this webinar, it's impossible to cover the ELD standards for each grade level. We will feature the grade 7 ELD standards and provide prompts for analyzing the standards so that each of you can explore the ELD standards at the grade level you teach or the grade level you chose to focus on today. In the California ELD Standards publication on page 25 is chapter 3, the standards kindergarten through grade 12, which contains the ELD standards for each grade level. We will start here. Make sure you find the grade level you want to select for today's session. The California ELD standards are organized into 2 main sections that are common across all grade levels. Section 1, overview, including a goal and critical principles for developing language and cognition in academic contexts. And section 2, elaboration on critical principles for developing language and cognition in academic contexts. Section 1 includes a goal statement for all EL students in California, followed by broader critical principles for developing language and cognition in academic contexts. Goal. This is an overarching goal statement that crystallizes what all California educators want for EL students' development of academic English language proficiency, success with grade level disciplinary content, and awareness of language. Critical principles for developing language and cognition in academic contexts. This is further detail of the goal statement, which defines the critical and meaningful experiences and knowledge that EL students need to ultimately achieve the goal. Section 2 of the California ELD standards is organized into 2 parts, with strands that are consistent across grade levels, yet developmentally appropriate for each grade level. At each grade level, the strands are detailed in standards that include descriptors for what students know and can do at each proficiency level. Each grade level ELD standard has descriptors for each of the 3 proficiency levels: emerging, expanding, and bridging. Part 1 of the California ELD standards, interacting in meaningful ways, addresses collaborative, interpretive, and productive language uses and purposes. Part 2 of the California ELD standards, learning about how English works, specifies particular elements of language structures that apply to using language in a variety of contexts and for a variety of purposes described in Part 1. Part 3 focuses on using foundational literacy skills. These language uses and purposes are often explicitly described and identifiable in the content standards. Knowledge of how English works and the use of specific language structures do apply to communicating about mathematics and science learning and content. Implementation of integrated ELD does not require math, science, and other content teachers to become linguists or ELD specialists. Rather, content teachers need to know enough about the language uses and practices of their discipline and about how to support EL students with disciplinary language and literacy development so that EL students maintain a steady trajectory toward full proficiency in English. ELD specialists should be collaborating closely with content teachers to provide specialized ELD support and instruction that builds into and from disciplinary learning. In section 2, elaboration on critical principles for developing language and cognition in academic contexts, we find part 2 of the ELD standards, learning about how English works. The 7 standards are Standard 1, understanding text structure. Standard 2, understanding cohesion. Standard 3, using verbs and verb phrases. Standard 4, using noun and noun phrases. Standard 5, modifying to add details. Standard 6, connecting ideas. And Standard 7, condensing ideas. The far left column in section 2, labeled Text and Discourse and Context, includes part 2 standard strands 1 through 7, which correspond to the English Language Arts, the ELA standards. It includes the purposes for using language, which include but is not limited to describing, entertaining, informing, interpreting, analyzing, recounting, and explaining, and more. The informational text types include but are not limited to description, procedure, recount, information report, explanation, exposition, response, recounting, explaining, persuading, negotiating, justifying, evaluating, and so on. Literary text types include but are not limited to stories, dramas, poetry, retelling a story, and so on. Audiences include but are not limited to peers, small group, and whole group. In the next 5 slides, we will highlight the corresponding ELA standards to each ELD standard, and also discuss the language demands of the standard for mathematical practices and the science and engineering practices. The slide will highlight the grade 7 ELD standards, but we encourage everyone, including grade 6 through 12 math, science, history, social studies, and other content teachers, to look at the ELD standards from your grade level, along with your content standards and the standards for mathematical practices and the science and engineering practices. We will begin with part 2, structuring cohesive text, knowledge of language, ELD standards. And there are 2 in this mode. Standard 1, ELD standard 1 is understanding text structure. The corresponding ELA reading standards for literature, RL, includes standard 7.5. The corresponding ELA reading standards for informational text, RI, includes standard 7.5. The corresponding ELA reading standards for literacy in science and technical subjects, RST, includes standard 7.5. The ELA corresponding writing standard, W, includes standard 7.2. The ELA corresponding writing standards for literacy for history, WHST, includes standard 7.2. And the ELA corresponding speaking and listening, SL, standard includes standard 7.4. We purposely did not include all the corresponding standards on the slide because of time and space, but you can see them in your copy of the ELD standards. ELD standard 2 is understanding cohesion. The corresponding ELA reading standards for informational text, RI, includes standard 7.5. The corresponding ELA reading standards for literacy in history, RH, includes standard 7.5. The corresponding ELA reading standards for literacy in science, standard 7.5. The ELA corresponding writing, W, standard includes standard 7.4. The corresponding ELA writing standards for literacy for history, WHST includes standard 7.4. And the corresponding language standard L includes standard 7.3. We just introduced the first two ELD standards in part 2, along with the corresponding English language arts standards. We will take some time to look at some of the corresponding ELA standards so that we can better understand what we are referring to. Again, we are highlighting grade 7, but you will want to find the corresponding ELA standards that pertain to your grade level or the grade level you selected today. One of the corresponding ELA standards is Reading Standards for Literacy in Science and Technical Subjects, RST 7.5, which is to analyze the structure an author uses to organize a text, including how the major sections contribute to the whole and to an understanding of the topic. This standard is found on page 83 of the ELA standards publication. Another one is Language Standard 7.3, which states that one should use knowledge of language and its conventions when writing, speaking, reading, or listening. This standard is found on page 72 of the ELA standards publication. The language standards for grades K through 5 begin on page 32 and on page 74 for the grades 9 through 12. Another one is Writing Standard 7.2, which requires writing informative or explanatory texts that examine a topic and convey ideas, concepts, and information through the selection, organization, and analysis of relevant content. This standard is found on page 57 of the ELA standards publication. The writing standards for grades K through 5 begin on page 21 and on page 61 for grades 9 through 12. Another one is Writing Standards for Literacy for History, Social Studies, Science, and Technical Subjects for grades 6 through 12. WHT 7.2, which is to write arguments focused on discipline-specific content. This standard is found on page 86 of the ELA standards publication in the grade 6 through 8 student strand. So this is the same for grades 9 through 10 student strand and the grade 11 through 12 student strand. I hope this helped you in locating the corresponding ELA standard, or at least some of them. I encourage all math, science, history, social studies, and other content teachers to hang in with us because we're going to take some time today for you to examine your content standards to find the language demands. We will continue with part 2, expanding and enriching ideas, knowledge of language, ELD standards. There are 3 in this mode. ELD standard 3 is using verbs and verb phrases. And this standard corresponds to the ELA Writing 7.5, Writing Standards for Literacy for History, Social Studies, Science, and Technical Subjects 7.5, Speaking and Listening Standards 7.6, and Language Standards 7.1. Again, we didn't include all the corresponding standards on the slide, but you can see in your copy of the ELD standards which ones they are. ELD standard 4 is using noun and noun phrases, and it corresponds to the ELA Writing 7.5, Writing Standards for Literacy for History, Social Studies, Science, and Technical Subjects 7.5, Speaking and Listening Standards 7.6, and Language Standards 7.3. ELD Standard 5 is modifying to add details, and it corresponds to Writing 7.4, Writing Standards for Literacy for History, Social Studies, Science, and Technical Subjects 7.4, Speaking and Listening Standards 7.6, and language standard 7.3. We will continue with part 2, connecting and condensing ideas, knowledge of language, ELD standards. There are 2 in this mode. ELD standard 6 is connecting ideas. And this standard corresponds to the ELA writing 7.4, writing standards for literacy for history, social studies, science, and technical subjects 7.4, speaking and listening standard 7.4, and language standard 7.6. ELD standard 7 is condensing ideas, and it corresponds to ELA writing 7.4, writing standards for literacy for history, social studies, science, and technical subjects 7.4, speaking and listening standard 7.4, and language standard 7.6. Sometime after the webinar, I encourage you all to revisit these corresponding ELA standards to become familiar with what the content standards expectation is for EL students. In these next 2 slides, we will examine the standards for mathematical practices and the science and engineering practices to identify the language demands that we will need to teach EL students with designated and integrated ELD instruction. The slide shows the 8 standards for mathematical practices, which are for use in grades kinder through 12, K through 12. And they are: 1, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. 2, reason abstractly and quantitatively. 3, construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. 4, model with mathematics. 5, use appropriate tools strategically. 6, attend to precision. 7, look for and make use of structure. And 8, look for and express regularity and repeated reasoning. It is critical for educators to identify the language that is required for students to be able to meet the rigor of the mathematical practices. For some of the practices, it is obvious. For some of the practices, it's not so obvious. For example, practice number 6, attempt to precision. For understanding, and we ask a student to explain how they attained a solution to a mathematical problem, the student will need to express that in a precise way, either oral or written. We need to teach EL students how to be precise with language, which could include using domain-specific words, connecting or condensing ideas, or other things. We need to provide them with language they can use to construct a precise explanation using academic English. This is an example of the language demands that are in the mathematical practices. Now, what are other language demands that we may be able to identify? This slide shows the 8 science and engineering practices which are for use in grades K through 12. And they are: 1, ask questions and define problems. 2, develop and use models. 3, plan and carry out investigations. 4, analyze and interpret data. 5, use mathematics and computational thinking. 6, construct explanations and design solutions. 7, engage in argument from evidence. And 8, obtain, evaluate, and communicate information. Again, it is critical for educators to identify the language required for students to meet the rigor of the science and engineering practices with the academic use of English. Look at one of the practices like constructing explanations and designing solutions. If we are checking for understanding and ask a student to explain a scientific experience or phenomenon, the student will need to have acquired language with skills or strategies to form and express a strong and precise explanation either oral or written. That may include word tense or how to arrive at a conclusion. Or perhaps students need to know how to add details, connect and condense ideas, or use noun and verb phrases. What language structures do they need to know so they are able to include in their explanation at a grade level proficiency? When content teachers examine the content standards through this language demands lens, they may begin to identify how to best support EL students in their classrooms. We can teach this to EL students with designated and integrated ELD instruction, as we mentioned. And as we mentioned before, the implementation of integrated ELD does not require content teachers to become linguists or ELD specialists. Rather, content teachers need to know enough about the language uses and the practices of their discipline and how to support their EL students with disciplinary language and literacy development so that EL students maintain a steady trajectory toward full proficiency in English. And of course, ELD specialists in collaboration with the content teachers is important so that they can build into and from disciplinary learning. So we've come to our time to pause and reflect. During this time, you will select a Part 2 ELD standard for your selected grade level and explore the corresponding English language arts standards. You will need to access the English language arts standards publication along with the ELD standards publication. K through 5 history social studies teachers may explore the writing standards, the speaking and listening standards, or the language standards for K through 5 in the ELA publication. Or you may explore the history social studies standards for your grade level to identify the language demands. History social studies teachers in grades 6 through 12 may explore the ELA writing standards for literacy and history social studies, science, and technical subjects for grades 6 through 12. Or you may explore the history social studies standards for your grade level to identify language demands. Math teachers may explore the standards for mathematical practices and the math standards to identify the language demands. Science teachers may explore the science and engineering practices and the next generation science standards to identify the language demands. And 6 through 12, science teachers may also explore the ELA writing standards for literacy and history social studies, science, and technical subjects for grades 6 through 12. After you explore, please take a moment to post any comments, insights, reflections, or new knowledge to the Padlet. You will have 5 minutes to explore and to post into the Padlet. We will post it in the chat links to the ELD and content standards and the Padlet. We will also post the standards for most mathematical practices and the science and engineering practices. It is 4:03. We will pause the recording for the next 5 minutes, and we will resume the recording when we return at 4:08 p.m. It is 4:08, and we are back, and I'm just going to read a few of the postings in the Padlet. See, attending to precision. I never thought about how attend to precision in the mathematic practices is about linguistic precision. 2, great to keep in mind. Math practice 3, construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. Being able to understand someone's thinking and verbalize how it makes sense or doesn't. That's right. So how do we teach that to our students, especially to our EL students who are developing that type of language? Thank you, folks, for reading, for going through the standards, and also for posting your thoughts into Padlet. So we will continue to the next part of the webinar where we will look at each Part 2 standards. And so I will pass it over to Christine.
Thank you so much, Gustavo. Thank you. Again, we'll look now at each standard at each level. And we'll use the following prompts to help us analyze the standards and consider appropriate instructional approaches for EL students. So first, we'll read each ELD standard at each level. Then we'll analyze the standard with the help of these prompts. What language features and structures do EL students need to know? What do I need to teach? How do I scaffold my instruction so EL students understand the language that they are learning to use? And how do I engage EL students to practice using the language? Finally, what shifts do I notice in the ELD standard, and how does each level build on the one before? We'll post this process in the chat. So part 2, standard 1, understanding text structure. At the emerging level, it says to apply understanding of how different text types are organized to express ideas. For example, how narratives are organized sequentially, to comprehending texts, and to writing brief arguments, informative or explanatory texts, and narratives. At the expanding level, it says to apply an understanding of the organizational features of different text types. For example, how narratives are organized by an event sequence that unfolds naturally versus how arguments are organized around reasons and evidence, to comprehending texts, and to writing increasingly clear and coherent arguments, informative or explanatory texts, and narratives, explanatory texts and narratives. And at the bridging level, it says to apply an understanding of the organizational structure of different text types. For example, how narratives are organized by an event sequence that unfolds naturally versus how arguments are organized around reasons and evidence, to comprehending texts and to writing clear and coherent arguments, informative or explanatory texts, and narratives. So what does a teacher need to teach? A teacher needs to teach each text type and how they are organized. The column on the left of the ELD standards indicates text types such as descriptions, information reports, explanations, and more. Now, depending on the text type, a teacher will need to teach sequencing, adding details, how to form a purpose statement, the use of transition words, and more. These are just some examples. And this can be taught during designated ELD instruction and supported with integrated ELD by the content teacher. For part 2, standard 2, understanding cohesion, at the emerging level, it says to apply knowledge of familiar language resources, but for referring to make texts more cohesive. For example, how pronouns refer back to nouns in text, to comprehending texts and writing brief texts. At the expanding level, it says to apply knowledge of familiar language resources for referring to make texts more cohesive. For example, how pronouns refer back to nouns in texts, how using synonyms helps avoid repetition, to comprehending texts and writing texts with increasing cohesion. And at the bridging level, it says to apply knowledge of familiar language resources for referring to make texts more cohesive. For example, how pronouns, synonyms, or nominalizations are used to refer backward in a text, to comprehending text and writing cohesive text. And what does a teacher need to teach? A teacher needs to teach EL students familiar language resources that assist them in making text more cohesive. For example, a teacher can teach students what are pronouns and nouns. They can teach them how pronouns refer back to nouns in texts, and a teacher needs to teach synonyms and how synonyms help avoid repetition. These are just a couple of examples of what a teacher needs to teach students along with other language resources. A teacher also needs to include in their instruction opportunities for EL students to practice using the newly learned language orally and in writing. And this can be taught during designated ELD instruction and supported with integrated ELD by the content teacher. So we're going to pause and reflect. we just presented ELD standards 1 and 2. Select one of the standards at your grade level or grade span to analyze and explore the following prompts to assist you in analyzing the ELD standard. What language features and structures do EL students need to know? What do I need to teach? How do I scaffold the instruction so they understand the language they are using? And how do I engage them to practice using the language? Finally, what shifts do I notice in the ELD standard? And how does each level build on the one before? You do not need to respond to all the prompts for this reflection. Choose one to explore. And then if you have time, explore another one. We'll post the prompts in the chat. And after you explore, please post any comments, insights, reflections, or new knowledge to the Padlet. You'll have 5 minutes to explore and post in the Padlet. And we'll post in the chat links to the ELD standards and the Padlet. And we'll pause the recording for the next 5 minutes, and we will resume the recording when we return at 4:20 p.m. Okay, oh, great. Okay, I see it's 4:20. And let's just go ahead and highlight some of what we see in the chat, or in the Padlet, excuse me. So I'm on pause and reflect too. I'll just highlight this first one, language features and structures. So someone shared talking about the purpose for using language, informational text types, literacy text types. Wonderful. So really thinking about not just name that's informational, that's a narrative, but what is the purpose of an informational text type? How is it structured? Why is informational different from a narrative? And why would a narrative open with something, a language resource like dialogue that you would not use in an informational text? So really getting into the purpose of those language resources. Thank you so much. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we'll continue looking at now standards 3, 4, and 5 at each level, and then have an opportunity to analyze the standards with the help of the prompts. This slide shows part 2, standard 3, using verbs and verb phrases. At the emerging level, it says to use a variety of verbs in different tenses. For example, present, past, future, simple, progressive, appropriate to the text type, and discipline, like simple past and past progressive for recounting and experience on familiar topics. At the expanding level, it says to use a variety of verbs in different tenses. For example, present, past, future, simple, progressive, perfect, appropriate to the task, text type, and discipline, like the simple present for literary analysis on an increasing variety of topics. At the bridging level, it says to use a variety of verbs in different tenses, such as present, past, future, simple, progressive, and perfect, appropriate to the task, text type, and discipline. For example, the present perfect can be used to describe previously made claims or conclusions on a variety of topics. So consider what a teacher would need to teach EL students to be able to perform at each level of the standard. Okay, and this slide shows part 2, standard 4, using nouns and noun phrases. At the emerging level, it says to expand noun phrases in basic ways. For example, adding a sensory adjective to a noun in order to enrich the meaning of sentences and add details about ideas, people, and things. At the expanding level, it says to expand noun phrases in a growing number of ways. For example, adding adjectives to nouns or simple clause embedding in order to enrich the meaning of sentences and add details about ideas, people, and things. And at the bridging level, it says to expand noun phrases in an increasing variety of ways. For example, more complex clause embedding in order to enrich the meaning of sentences and add details about ideas, people, and things. Now, consider what a teacher would need to teach EL students to be able to perform at each level of the standard. And this slide shows part 2, standard 5, modifying to add details. At the emerging level, it says to expand sentences with simple adverbials. For example, adverbs, adverb phrases, and prepositional phrases to provide details like time, manner, place, and cause about a familiar activity or process. At the expanding level, it says to expand sentences with simple adverbials, for example, adverbs, adverb phrases, and prepositional phrases to provide details like time, manner, place, and cause about a familiar or new activity or process. And at the bridging level, it says to expand sentences with a variety of adverbials, for example, adverbs, adverb phrases, and clauses, and prepositional phrases to provide details like time, manner, place, and cause about familiar and new activities or processes. Consider what a teacher would need to teach EL students to be able to perform at each level of this standard. And now we're going to pause and reflect. We just presented ELD standards 3, 4, and 5. Select one of the standards at your grade or grade span to analyze and explore the prompts to assist you in analyzing the ELD standard. You do not need to respond to all the prompts for this reflection. Choose one to explore. And then, if you have time, explore another one. We'll post the prompts in the chat. After you explore, please post any comments, insights, reflections, or new knowledge to the Padlet. You will have 5 minutes to explore and post in the Padlet, and we will post in the chat links to the ELD standards and the Padlet. We'll pause the recording for the next 5 minutes. We will resume the recording when we return at 4:30 p.m. Okay, we're back, and let's navigate to the Padlet and see a few comments that folks may have shared. I'm on pause and reflect 3. Okay, I'll just highlight one here. Standards 3 and 4. The GLAD strategy sentence patterning chart is awesome for teaching parts of speech and engaging in authentic practice with the language. I want to highlight that idea of authentic, that instead of it being decontextualized grammar, for the sake of grammar, what we're doing is we're making explicit for students the language resources of parts of speech and authentically, right? So analyzing language and knowing why we make certain choices, using why one verb is more appropriate than another in the context of real, meaningful communication. So thank you so much for your engagement in the Padlet. And with that, I'll pass it over to Gustavo, who will lead us in looking at the next set of Part 2 standards.
Thank you, Christine. We will continue looking at standards 6 and 7 at each level, and then have an opportunity to analyze the standards with the help of the prompts. This slide shows Part 2, Standard 6, Connecting Ideas. At the emerging level, it says to combine clauses in a few basic ways to make connections between and join ideas. For example, creating compound sentences using and, but, so, and creating complex sentences using because. At the expanding level, it says to combine clauses in an increasing variety of ways, like creating compound and complex sentences, to make connections between ideas, and to join ideas. For example, to express a reason like, he stayed at home on Sunday to study for Monday's exam, or to make a concession like, she studied all night even though she wasn't feeling well. At the bridging level, it says to combine clauses in a wide variety of ways, like creating compound, complex, and compound complex sentences to make connections between ideas and to join ideas. For example, to show the relationship between multiple events or ideas like, after eating lunch, the students worked in groups while their teacher walked around the room. Or to evaluate an argument like, the author claims, although there is a lack of evidence to support this claim. Consider what a teacher would need to teach EL students to be able to perform of this standard. This slide shows part 2, standard 7, condensing ideas. At the emerging level, it says to condense ideas in simple ways. For example, by compounding verbs, adding prepositional phrases, or through simple embedded clauses or other ways of condensing to create precise and detailed sentences, as in, this is a story about a girl. The girl changed the world. Then condensing that to, this is a story about a girl who changed the world. At the expanding level, it says to condense ideas in an increasing variety of ways. For example, through various types of embedded clauses and other ways of condensing to create precise and detailed sentences, as in, organic vegetables are food. They're made without chemical fertilizers. They're made without chemical insecticides. Then condensing that to, organic vegetables are foods that are made without chemical fertilizers or insecticides. At the bridging level, it says to condense ideas in a variety of ways. For example, through various types of embedded clauses, ways of condensing and normalization to create precise and detailed sentences, as in, they destroyed the rainforest. Lots of animals died. Then condensing to, the destruction of the rainforest led to the death of many animals. Consider what a teacher would need to teach EL students to be able to perform at each level of this standard. And that brings us to another pause and reflect. We just presented ELD standard 6 and 7. Select one of the standards at your grade or grade span to analyze and explore the prompts to assist you in analyzing the ELD standard. You do not need to respond to all the prompts for this reflection. Just choose one to explore. Then if you have time, explore another one. We will post the prompts in the chat. After you explore, please post any comments, insights, reflections, or new knowledge. You will have 5 minutes to explore and post in the Padlet. We will post in the chat links to the ELD standards and the Padlet. And we will pause this recording for the next 5 minutes. And we will resume the recording when we return at 4:41 p.m. It is 4:41. Thank you, everybody, for your engagement. I'm going to take a look at the Padlet. See, we have connecting and condensing ideas can be scaffolded with lots of modeling and partner work to revise writing pieces during writer's workshop. Students can be given sentence stems or word banks to help them incorporate the language into their own work. That's excellent, right? And that's authentic. Students can be, they're working together. They can cut up those sentence strips and see what words do we need, what do we don't need, what words do we need to add. So that definitely can be one way that students can work on the connecting and condensing. Thank you so much. Scaffolding, a read aloud, what a character does or did in the story, use a personal example. Excellent, thank you so much. If you haven't had a chance to put a reflection in the Padlet, you still have an opportunity to do so. Thank you so much. And we are going to continue. Okay.
OLA stands for Oral Language.
Okay, we're gonna view a video. So this is from the CDE ELD video series, and it's also this video demonstrates the practice of oral language analysis. It's used by teachers that are analyzing EL students' English proficiency progress and to plan appropriate designated ELD instruction using ELD standards to best meet the students' English proficiency needs. So we're going to take a look at this video. We will post in the chat a link not only to this video, but also to the ELD video series where you can find this video and others, and also a link to the Padlet. The video clip is from grade 5, English Language Arts, Social Studies, designated ELD oral language analysis. And as you watch the video, we encourage you to share comments, questions, insights, etc. in the Padlet regarding the video. So let's go ahead and watch the video.
Analysis, and it's a formative assessment
Do this again.
that we use with our English language learners.
Right here, I have a prompt, a question for us to talk about.
What the ELD
Okay, I apologize.
does is it allows a teacher to take a measurement of where a student is at a certain moment in time, and also where they are in regards to the unit, to the actual content that they're learning.
How did westward expansion affect different groups of people? So see this word affect? That's a clue to your brain that we're going to do cause and effect.
The teacher asks the students the question, makes sure that they understand the prompt, maybe highlights the important words like describe and characteristics, and then writes down verbatim what each student says.
For this activity, you guys, you can pull it out of your head if you remember, but you feel free to use the charts. So who has an idea?
It's almost always recommended to incorporate a language function into the question, using language like describe the characteristics of, or compare and contrast this and that, depending on what the language function is of the unit.
Like the trail of tears.
What do you want to say about it?
The effect was that people had to walk a lot, and some of them died.
Some of them died. What else?
And died on the trail.
I think there's sometimes a tendency for teachers to go straight to the written because it's right in front of them. And so we try and focus when we're having teachers plan designated English language development on oral language first, because if they have rich oral language, then that will eventually translate into their writing.
And then they can have more land. And then the trail of tears began.
Traditionally, when we talk about designated English language development, we like to say you're both preparing students for whole class lessons to come or responding to what you're noticing that they're doing. What the OLA does is it allows teachers to have a concrete piece of evidence that they can look at and see how they're getting towards the spoken English that we would like them to speak. But it allows us to then analyze a piece of text and think about how we can use the English language development standards to push them to the next level.
So remember, we started all the way over here and we worked our way over here. And how did that affect different groups of people? And when you're ready to answer, you can stand over here and do it.
I think they want to affect, they want to travel around.
Can you say that one more time?
The most crucial step is the analysis of the OLA. The teachers will take the OLA back and work in grade level teams, sometimes with a coach. And the first step is to analyze what we call approximation.
So I took this today with a group of my kids you probably know pretty well.
We prefer the term approximation to the term error because approximation indicates that students are moving from one language to another and they're approximating standard English. And so we want to celebrate what they're bringing instead of looking at it as a deficit.
The westward expansion affected other people because of the Oregon Trail, caused people to get there to claim their free land.
Okay, well, he got like the cause and effect thing right there, right? Like he has that. Might not be used totally correctly, but at least he's trying it.
Is that in transition?
It sounds a lot like boxes and bullets, right? So if like from writers when he's, can you imagine that? So like his first point would be box, jot.
That would be like a bullet.
The effect was that some of them died. on the trail and cried because their dog, like their family members died.
He uses the word affect. So he's definitely going back to the prompt, trying to explain his answer. He's trying to answer this, which is good.
Thing that jumps out at me that we all hear all the time is this one, the for they can, right? So she's like translating it in her head from like para and por, already going that way. It doesn't necessarily sound like she's trying to go back and answer the prompt as much or like using a structure as much as these two are.
If we were to pull them into a small group, are there any patterns that we see amongst all three of them?
Definitely with all three of them, try to bring back in like the sentence frames and have them use the cause and effect sentence frames.
The next step is actually to crack open the ELD standards and start looking through them and figure out, okay, how can we push our students to the next level? If they were going to write this in, sort of an ideal form, what would it look like? And now let's plan a series of lessons to push them towards that.
These are clearly not emerging students, but maybe if we look at expanding or bridging, we might find some things that would be helpful. Like, for example, combining clauses.
I was also looking at like the connecting ideas, which might be on the other page for you guys. But this is for expanding and for bridging. It says combine clauses in a wide variety of ways, creating compound and complex sentences to make connections between and join ideas, right? It seems like, especially with Edwin, that he needs that linking, he needs the support of combining those clauses and connecting their ideas.
The teacher collaboration actually serves a number of purposes. One is simply they're able to sort of bounce ideas off each other, they're suggesting standards, they're working back and forth. Another thing that's really wonderful is that student teachers can then say, oh, I know that I have 2 kids in my class who are having that exact same issue. During our designated ELD time, why don't I send them to you and you can send me these other students, and that allows teachers to be very efficient.
I know that there are probably a couple of students in my class too that could benefit from like those types of lessons.
And then the next step is to plan a series of designated ELD lessons that address whatever it is that you saw coming up in the OLA.
This like subject matter is so heavy anyway. Maybe we should kind of like back off of that and have them try just using the sentence frames with something they know first for day 1. We'll do sentence frames like soccer or Fortnite or whatever it's going to be.
The other thing that we were also thinking about, right, was using those cause and effect graphic organizers. So using that with something known.
I
Get
see
what I'm
what you're
saying?
saying. Okay.
Analyzing with your peers and getting their ideas about how do I address this, how do I address that, it's actually extremely empowering.
In your work today, you gave them more than one way, more than one cause and effect sentence frame to use. So to see that there's more than one way that they can say this.
Yeah, so we could show them the graphic organizer that has all the effects, and then these are the different ways of saying it, and those are different ones. Cool, I like it. So model it first, graphic org, and then show them the sentence frames for them to try it.
Yeah.
Cool. So we have day 1 graphic orgs with things that they know, just to make sure that they know how to use them correctly. Day 2 is using sentence frames with this, revisiting it, and then day 3,
did a lot of great
yeah, they did great things, and we want to definitely make sure they know that. And then day 3 would be going to show, like, look, if you take this out, it makes more sense. And then there's also these different ways of saying it in a more cohesive way.
Sounds like a good plan.
One of the difficulties with designated ELD is that it's hard to fit into the day, but
Wonderful. Thank you for watching that. And if you've been posting into the Padlet, excellent. Thank you for that too. I think the important thing about the way we want to at least show this video is not about maybe this specific process for analyzing student and their language, but the importance of finding a way that you all, either in your grade level or your school, or to find a way of how to analyze how students are speaking or writing, how they're organizing their thoughts, and the type of language that they're either using or not using, and how to develop strategic ways of supporting those students academically. Wonderful. So hopefully you have links to that video if you want to watch at another time, and also to the ELD video series. And we are going to continue. Whoa, I think I went too far. So at this time, we'll take any questions that you have. And Christine will join me in answering questions that folks may have. Let's see. I don't see any in the Q&A. If anybody have any questions, if you could post it in the Q&A right now, that would be great. And if you don't have a question now, but maybe you have a question later, you can always send us questions at lplo@cde.ca.gov. So our email, again, is lplo@cde.ca.gov. And I don't see any questions. So we are going to continue on. But if you think of a question, we can definitely have time before we end today to answer it if we can. So this concludes the presentation portion of today's webinar session. And now I'm going to pass it over to Christine.
Thank you, Gustavo. And thanks to folks for engaging in the Padlet around that video. I just want to highlight one person said, geez, I wish I had some time to meet with to go over the ELD standards. And somebody else mentioned how much they enjoyed this video and how they've used this kind of protocol with their own colleagues. So thank you for sharing. So before we close, we'd love to share the link to the feedback survey for this webinar. And your feedback on today's webinar is very important. It will help us continuously improve our practice and ensure future webinars will meet your needs. A link to the survey has been provided in the chat. And now I'll pass it back to Gustavo to conclude today's webinar.
Wonderful. Thank you, Christine. And thank you for sharing that comment from the Padlet. That was definitely a truth, a reality that I know a lot of teachers face. So the recordings of these webinars, the California ELD Standards webinar series, will be available. We're working on it. Right now, we are in the middle of going through the CDE YouTube process for our first couple webinar recordings. So we appreciate everybody's patience. But these, all the recordings will be posted on the CDE ELD Standards webpage, and it will be in the ELD Standards tab. So look for that, and we hope to have all of them, but at least the first few posted early to mid-summer, and hopefully have them all posted this summer. So that's our goal, and we're working on that. And then finally, I'd like to thank my colleague, Lori Kelly, for her help in executing today's webinar behind the scenes. Thank you, Lori. And also Christine, thank you so much. And on behalf of Christine, myself, of the administrators and staff from the Multilingual Support Division and the Region 15 Comprehensive Center at West Ed, we thank all of you for joining us today. We hope we get to see you all soon. So see you next time.
Have a great end of the school year, everyone.